Hello, family. Let me ask you a question. How will our children and grandchildren learn the history this country too often leaves out? The history that's being erased right before our eyes. We can't leave it to chance. We have to teach it, tell it, and make sure that they can pass it on. Today, we're going to walk together through one of the most pivotal days in American history, the March on Washington, D.C. for jobs and freedom. Before we begin, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, like the video, share it with your family, your church group, or your community. And if you want to go deeper, join our private Facebook group. You'll find the link in the description below, along with our full Black History book library, so you can build your own at home. All right, let's get to it. On August the 28th, 1963, more than 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. for what would become one of the most significant events in American civil rights history, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. At a time when the United States was grappling with racial injustice, economic inequality, and social unrest, this demonstration marked a unified call for justice, equality, and dignity for African Americans. The march was not spontaneous. It was the product of decades of struggle, careful planning, and coalition building. It drew people from across the country and left a lasting impression on the nation's conscience. Today, we will explore why the March on Washington took place, what events led up to it, the challenges that organizers faced, the key figures who played pivotal roles, the diversity and size of the crowd, and the long-term impact of this historic event. The March on Washington was born out of a deep-seated frustration with the slow pace of civil rights reforms and a national outcry against systemic racism. By 1963, Black Americans faced rampant discrimination in nearly every facet of life: education, employment, housing, and voting. Jim Crow laws in the South enforced segregation, while economic disparities plagued Black communities in the North. Despite legal victories like Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, which declared school segregation unconstitutional, meaningful change was elusive. The idea of a mass demonstration in Washington, D.C. had actually been introduced decades earlier. Labor leader A. Phillips Randolph first proposed a march in 1941 to protest discriminatory practices in the defense industry and the military. The protest was called off when President Franklin D. Roosevelt agreed to establish the Fair Employment Practices Committee. But the 1960s, which is when I was born, the urgency of the civil rights crisis made such a demonstration both necessary and inevitable. The immediate catalyst of the 1963 march was the failure of Congress to pass meaningful civil rights legislation, despite ongoing violence and protests across the South. Activists saw a large, peaceful protest in the nation's capital as a way to pressure lawmakers and the president to act decisively. The march aimed to push for a comprehensive civil rights bill, end school segregation, protect voting rights, ensure equal employment opportunities, and raise the federal minimum wage. It was a demand not just for civil rights, but for economic justice as well. The groundwork for the march was laid through a series of escalating events in the early 1960s. The Freedom Rides of 1961, organized by the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE, challenged segregation in interstate bus travel. The violent reactions to these riots, particularly in Alabama and Mississippi, highlighted the depth of Southern resistance to integration. In 1962 and 1963, civil rights organizations intensified their efforts. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, known as SCLC, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., focused on campaigns in cities like Birmingham, Alabama, where brutal police tactics against peaceful protesters, including children, were broadcast nationwide. The images of police dogs and fire hose used on demonstrators shocked Americans and garnered global attention. Meanwhile, President John F. Kennedy proposed civil rights legislation in June 1963 after growing public pressure. However, many activists believed Kennedy's bill didn't go far enough. To push the issue forward, A. Philip Randolph revived his earlier idea of a mass march. He joined forces with Bayard Rustin, a seasoned organizer and pacifist, to plan a nonviolent demonstration that would galvanize national attention. 6 major civil rights organizations came together to support the march: the NAACP, the SCLC, CORE, C-O-R-E, and the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The National Urban League and Randolph's Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Despite differing ideologies, these groups agreed on a united front for the sake of a greater cause. Organizing such a massive event posed numerous challenges. One of the primary difficulties was uniting various civil rights organizations, each with its own agendas, strategies, and leadership styles. For example, the NAACP focused on legal reform through the courts, while SNCC emphasized grassroots organizing and direct action. Compromise had to be made to present a cohesive message. Another obstacle was logistical. With only 2 months to plan, organizers had to arrange transportation, security, permits, first aid stations, and communication lines for hundreds of thousands of people. Bayard Rustin took charge of logistics, demonstrating remarkable organizational skills in mobilizing buses, trains, and planes to transport people to Washington, while ensuring the march would be peaceful and disciplined. Political opposition also loomed. Some members of Congress and segments of the white population feared the march would lead to violence and riots. The Kennedy administration, though publicly supportive, was privately nervous about the potential of disruptions. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, actively tried to discredit organizers, particularly Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., through surveillance and propaganda. Within the movement, gender tensions also surfaced. Although many women had played key roles in the civil rights movement, they were largely sidelined during the event's planning and speaking program. This exclusion drew criticism from activists like Dorothy Height and Anna Arnold Hedgeman, who challenged the male-dominated leadership structure. Family, if you're watching this and you believe that our children and our grandchildren need to be taught our history, pause for a moment and hit the subscribe button. Like this video so more people can find it and share it with someone who needs to know this story. Several prominent leaders were instrumental in bringing the March to Washington to life. Among them, A. Philip Randolph, often called the father of the march. Randolph's decades of advocacy for Black labor rights gave the movement a strong foundation in economic justice. Bayard Rustin, the chief organizer of the march. Rustin's expertise in nonviolent protest and logistical planning was crucial. Despite being marginalized due to his homosexuality, Rustin's leadership was indispensable. It's important to note that during his youth, he partnered with the Young Communist League, YCL, while attending City College in New York in the late 1930s. He joined the YCL because of their initial stance on racial justice and civil rights. However, Rustin left the organization in 1941 when the Communist Party reversed its anti-war position and shifted focus away from civil rights following Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. Rustin's departure was also driven by his pacifist beliefs, which conflicted with the Communist Party's stance after the outbreak of World War II. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As president of the SCLC, Dr. King became the symbolic face of the march. His iconic "I Have a Dream" speech remains one of the most powerful articulations of American ideas of freedom and equality. John Lewis, known as Good Trouble. Then just 23 years old and chairman of the SNCC, John Lewis delivered one of the most passionate and confrontational speeches of the day, calling for more radical change. His original speech was toned down under pressure, reflecting internal tensions within the movement. Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, Whitney M. Young Jr. of the National Urban League, and James Farmer of CORE, who were in jail at the time, sent statements. These leaders each represented key civil rights organizations and brought diverse constituencies to the march. Mahalia Jackson and Marian Anderson. These legendary singers lent their voices and stature, adding cultural resonance to the event. The March on Washington drew an estimated 250,000 people, making it the largest civil rights demonstration in American history up to that point. Attendees came from across the country, north and south, urban and rural, black and white. Roughly 1/3 of the crowd was white, demonstrating a growing multiracial coalition for civil rights. Church groups, labor unions, student organizations, and grassroots activists coordinated transportation for thousands. Over 2,000 chartered buses and 21 special trains brought people to the Capitol. Many came at great personal cost, taking unpaid leave or risking retaliation from employers and community leaders. The crowd was remarkably peaceful and orderly. Volunteers distributed water, food, and even diapers. The entire march was a testament to discipline, nonviolent protest. From the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, demonstrators listened to speeches, gospel music, and calls for justice, all under the gaze of Abraham Lincoln's statue, an intentional symbol linking the civil rights struggle to the legacy of emancipation. The March on Washington had immediate and long-lasting effects. Just 2 weeks later, the nation was jolted again when 4 black girls were killed in a church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama. Addie Mae Collins, age 14, Denise McNair, age 14, Carol Robinson, age 14, and Cynthia Wesley, age 11, highlighting the ongoing violence and urgency of the movement. Nonetheless, the march succeeded in shifting public opinion and political momentum. President Kennedy and later President Lyndon B. Johnson cited the march as a key influence in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These landmark laws outlawed segregation in public places and removed some barriers to black enfranchisement. Culturally, the march elevated civil rights from a regional issue to a national moral crisis. Dr. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech entered the American lexicon, taught in schools and referenced by politicians across the ideological spectrum. The march also inspired future movements. The 1963 march was a model for later protests, including the Women's March, LGBTQ+ marches, immigrants' rights protests, and the 2020 Black Lives Matter demonstration. It affirmed that peaceful, large-scale protests could capture the nation's attention and bring about meaningful change. Yet, it also exposed enduring challenges. Economic justice, central to the original vision, remains an unfinished agenda. The fact that many of the issues raised in 1963 persist today is a sobering reminder that the march was not the end point, but a milestone in a continuing journey. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was a watershed moment in the fight for civil rights in America. It arose from decades of oppression and activism. It overcame enormous logistical and political challenges and brought together a diverse coalition of Americans demanding justice, with leadership figures like A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It transformed the civil rights movement into a national moral force. The presence of 250,000 people from all corners of the country sent a powerful message to lawmakers, the media, and the world. Though the road to equality remains unfinished, the legacy of August 28, 1963 continues to inspire new generations to dream, to act, and to march. Every one of these stories is more than just history. It's a blueprint for what it takes to create change. So here's what I want you to do. Subscribe to Unlocking Black History on YouTube. Like and share this video with your children, grandchildren, and your community. Sit down with them, watch it together, and discuss it. Join our private Facebook group for deeper conversations. And add today's book recommendation, The March on Washington by William P. Jones, to your home library. You can find it in our Black History book library linked in the description. Let's keep teaching, let's keep telling the truth, and let's make sure that our next generation knows the road that we've walked and the road ahead. I'll see you at the next video.